Okay, Judy, I think we can get started. We've got a few coming in, but we'll start the opening if you're ready.
Yes, well, good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. Welcome to the third of ASA's Data Leadership webinar series. I see some familiar names. Some of you have joined us in our previous two webinars. Welcome again. Today, we will be exploring data inquiry into family and community engagement. This session is being recorded, so you'll be able to access it through ASA after the session. We'll spend the morning together until about 11 o'clock. You'll have opportunities to check with us to follow up with your work during office hours on February 18 from 1 to 3, and we'll let you know more about that later. Please be sure that you have accessed these slides so that you can use the many embedded links that are in the slides throughout the webinar. A link on this slide is on this slide and should have been emailed to you if you look at this front slide. Next. The WISE Explore team welcomes you, and you'll see who we are here. I'm Judy Sargent from CISA 7, waving at you here. We have Lisa Arneson from CISA 3. Give us a wave, Lisa. Yes. We have Wendy Savasky from DPI. Welcome, Wendy. And we have Marianne Hujak, our host today, there from Wild Rose, Wisconsin. So welcome, everyone. We are the developers and the facilitators for today's session. So about this webinar, the topics that we've had through the series are varied, and you might even say these are very non-traditional when it comes to data inquiry. Throughout the series, we're exploring those more unfamiliar data sources that one might use to conduct inquiry into topics: safe and supported students, effective instruction today, family and community engagement, and also school and instructional leadership. These topics were chosen because they align with the DPI's mission priorities, and they are very important now during these unprecedented times of COVID. Today, of course, we're going to focus on inquiry into family and community engagement. Next. Today's outcomes include determining the state and local evidence sources that you might use related to family and community engagement, understanding processes for leading inquiry into both student and practice and systems data that inform your adult practices, and planning your own investigation into practices and systems to inform your theories of action and plans for improvement. There are 3 additional extension activities that are available to you should you wish to continue your work, and we'll talk about those at the end of the webinar as well. Now, we'd like to know who's here today, so we'd like to take a minute for you to close your video, make sure it's off right now, and then we're going to ask you to turn it back on when I call on a role that applies to you in your current position. So first of all, if you are a district administrator, would you show your video and give us a wave? If you're a district administrator. Yay, Tequila! See you, thank you. If you are a school principal, would you please turn your video on and give us a wave? Oh, look at all the school principals. Hello, thank you. Thank you for joining us today. If you are an assistant or associate principal, would you please open up your video and give us a wave? Hi, Peg, good to see you. Thank you for joining us. If you're a curriculum and instruction coordinator or director, learning director, would you please open up your video and give us a wave? And Peg's wearing multiple hats. Hi, Shannon. Good to see you. If you're a classroom teacher, would you please open up your video and give us a wave? Any classroom teachers today? No, they're busy teaching today. How about pupil services or special education? Anybody from that department? No. Any other roles? Open up your video and tell us who you are. Anybody? How about a CISA person? Open up your video and say hi. There we go. Hi, Kristen. Thank you for joining us today.
And I think we have a couple DPI folks on today as well.
Okay, if you're from the Department of Public Instruction, would you please open up your video? Give us a big wave, DPI. Thank you for being here today. And we wanted to let you know, even though we had 81 people registered for this webinar, we know that many of them are super busy and can't join us live. We'll be joining this webinar or participating in it through the archived recorded video through Awesome. All right, let's talk about inquiry, our note-taking process for today. We did provide a note-taking template for you. The link is on slide 6 here. This is optional for you to use on your own with the topics listed there. And to help you think about your own reflections, you can take notes in here. Who are you going to collaborate with on this topic when you get back with your teams? And what, as a leader, so we have so many leaders in on this webinar, what actions do you think should be taken in your school to advance these ideas further? So this is for you. You can click on the doc, it'll ask you to make a copy and put it in your own Google Drive for your use. All right, let's talk about inquiry process. You'll see up in the upper right corner a green ring that represents what we call a practices data inquiry process, because today we're talking about practices, adult practices, more than student data. It's more what we're doing to engage family and community. So the process that we're going to be going through today is talking about the importance of definitions and focus, that when you work in an area like family and community engagement, it's critical to define what it is we're talking about. Just what is family or community engagement? Next, the process needs to be collaborative, and I know you know that as leaders. Determine who your important stakeholders will be, how you're going to involve them in gathering, analyzing, and sharing this information. And the team should also be the same people involved in the next steps of planning improvement strategies around family and community engagement. Once you have your definition and you've got your collaborative process in place, then you begin the process of inquiry, which starts with the posing of important questions about the current state of family and community engagement that you would want to answer, like your team wants to answer. Once you have those questions, you then plan your investigation by determining, well, what sources of data are we going to use? And then how are we going to gather and collect that data in a way that we can use it, look at it, and analyze it? This step takes time for teams to analyze, interpret, and clarify your data findings. And the results of this investigation step should include both your critical findings for improvement and also the good news, the findings that you want to use to celebrate success. And this really is helpful if the work is calendared to conduct your inquiry and determine how this work embeds and coincides with other school improvement work that you're doing. A well-planned investigation should yield results that inform and propose those strategies. Marianne, can you show slide 7? The difference in this inquiry process from just, for example, shopping for engagement strategies is that it's informed by the current state of practices in your school. So the inquiry is right into your school. What's happening here? You know, what's our engagement? So that your future strategies can build upon what's working well while creating a framework for improving in areas that are not working quite as well, not as effective. So this team, the WISE Explore team, we've been working for a lot of years now, developing inquiry processes that help guide your teams through these steps that results in a data-informed plan for improvement. And we believe that family and community engagement are integral to all improvement work in a school and a district. You can contact your local CESA data specialist. Every CESA has one or more data specialists, that's their title, who are trained in these processes, and they can provide more information about how to use this WISE Explore data inquiry process if you don't have one of your own. And if you want to learn more about activities or training, resources, or coaching, contact your local CESA data specialist. So we can move on now to defining family engagement.
All right, thank you, Judy. So we're going to start with family engagement, and we're going to discuss, first of all, a definition of family engagement that we're planning to use for this webinar. We understand that there are many different definitions for family engagement. We want to lift the term families in our work instead of parents because it's much more inclusive and it reflects our diverse family structures and caregivers. So in diverse communities, for example, our many tribal communities, the term family extends to grandparents, brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, cousins, clans, and elders, all of whom are involved in raising the children. So by using the term family engagement, we broaden that sense of belonging when we discuss this topic. So consider all of the different, family units: blended, foster, adopted, ethnic. So when you use the term family engagement, you are creating a much more inclusive framework for your inquiry. So we want to get started with you having a chance to talk a little bit together. We would like your input and sharing as well. So we're going to give you about 10 minutes to join a breakout room, and we'll randomly assign you to a breakout room, and ask that you in that breakout room discuss the questions that are written here on the slide. How do you describe family engagement? How is family engagement similar or different during the COVID epidemic? And then think about your situation. Post some comments to either one of these questions on the Jamboard that's linked on this slide, which is why I was trying to make sure everyone had the link to the slides. So I apologize for moving the slides around on all of you. And if this is your very first Jamboard experience, the way you use the Jamboard is when you open it, you'll find some tools on the left-hand side, and you'll find a little one that looks like a sticky note, for example, and you just click on that, and then it'll open it up and you can type on it. So, and you can move those around and you can have all kinds of fun. But also we want to remind you of that notes document. And so you may want to record some of your ideas or some of the ideas from the Jamboard in that notes document as well. So again, there are many facets to family and community engagement. So let's have a quick little share. So I'm going to create the breakout rooms now, and you should all get an invitation to join a breakout room. We'll see you in about 10 minutes. Okay, the breakout rooms are closed. Thank you all for adding some pieces to the Jamboard, and we left it up here so you can kind of take a look quick too. But again, there are so many facets to family and community engagement, and we're going to try to take a look at a few of those, and maybe these are some things that you've talked about in your breakout room, and I know the breakout rooms go really fast, so there's not a lot of time to talk. We'd like a lot more for sure. So thank you for engaging with us in that. So did you know, and I'm not going to read these, but I'll go slow enough, hopefully, that you can all read them as we scroll through. There is solid research, lots of it, behind family engagement, and so and how it links to many benefits for students. 2 key studies are linked here, and those indicate that family and community engagement, when done well, is a school improvement strategy equally as important as effective instruction. However, the key here is effective, right? And so we want to take a look at what that looks like. Family engagement, as we said, is not the same as family involvement because family engagement is active and it requires that two-way communication between schools and families that really values the family's role in the child's education as true partners. And again, we know, you all know this, right? But those are things that hopefully you can use to share as you try to build that family engagement plan within your school and district. In 2014, the Wisconsin DPI formed a parent advisory council. And some of you, I'm sure, remember this quite well. Maybe we're even had families on the council. But the goal was to review strategies to improve school performance. And the group identified family engagement as a priority for promoting excellence for all students. Their research on family and community engagement led them to recommend reframing current family involvement practices and urge schools to implement best practices of family engagement. As we continue our inquiry today, this chart may be helpful to reflect on your school's family engagement practices. So which half of the chart best represents your school's efforts? Is family engagement left up to individual teachers, or is there a school-wide systemic approach to engaging families and the community as partners? Are efforts driven by compliance and grant funding? So the only family engagement is what you do for Title I and Title III, for example, or is family engagement incorporated as part of that continuous improvement planning and sustained through leadership training and the resource allocation? I know that's a lot to think about, but this is really important as research shows us, right? At the heart of family engagement is the creation of trusting relationships between families and educators, bottom line. In this example here, you can see the nuance between activities that are practices that result in weak trusting relationships and those that build that strong trusting relationship, and then how those relationships connect to student learning. This graph it helps with simplicity, right? Because of its importance, you will also find that family engagement with schools is included in various accountability requirements, and we have included these also. All of those accountability pieces are in the slide deck. We are not going to go through those in the presentation today, but we left them in the slide deck for your reference. So please make a note, maybe in your notes document, to review those slides when you have a chance. All right, and we're gonna switch gears just a little bit and dig a little bit deeper in inquiry. And Lisa, I'm gonna ask that you take it from here for a bit.
All right, thanks, Marianne. Our inquiry question for today is, to what degree are your family and community engagement practices during COVID-19 resulting in students meeting learning expectations? How would we launch an investigation into our practices? One way to begin an inquiry is to collaboratively conduct a self-assessment into family engagement practices. It will be important for you to understand your data within the context of the demographic makeup of the students in your school. Does the data you collect represent the demographic makeup, or is it representative of only certain groups? We recommend using WiseDash or a similar dashboard tool to engage your team in an activity that develops an understanding of the demographic makeup of the families in your school. Having this background will be important to analyzing and interpreting the family engagement data you collect, and it's a great start and foundation for this activity. So we've put together a list of instructions on how to use WiseDash Public to look up enrollment demographics for your district and school. We'll give you about 5 minutes to explore that in Wise-Public, and you can follow the steps on the slide here. Basically, we give you the link to the public portal in Wise and walk you through sort of the places that you could go. But ultimately, we want you to think about how does this data inform you about how to inquire into family engagement for families with different demographics. So I'm going to set up a timer for 5 minutes and give you just a few minutes to dig around, poke around in Wise-Public, and I'll bring you back again after 5 minutes. All right. And thanks, Marianne, for doing that demonstration in the background. It was really helpful. And hopefully all of you have gained some insight perhaps on the demographics and really thinking about ways to engage the families of all students. We're going to keep going. The self-assessment that we're going to share with you today is adapted from Vermont's Family Engagement Toolkit and Self-Assessment. It's linked here for your reference. It's quite a detailed document. They've identified 7 core principles to examine family engagement. We're going to use these indicators and self-assessment to begin our inquiry. The principles include creating a welcoming environment, building effective two-way communication, supporting the success of students, sharing power and responsibility, partnering with the community, providing equity and access, and ensuring sustainability. Each of these principles are defined at length in the toolkit, and these may be helpful for you to use with your staff in continuing this work in your district. You may have a set of core principles that you will use to drive your inquiry. We offer these as an example after reviewing multiple frameworks. It's apparent that there is a lot of similarity in the concepts included in these elements among the variety of frameworks we explored. How do these principles align with what you added and saw in the Jamboard? We've provided a jigsaw activity on the next slide that you can use to delve into these principles if you choose. So looking at the next slide, this again is just an option. We're not going to do this activity, but this is a sample for your team to complete that establishes a sound understanding of these principles prior to doing the self-assessment to make sure everyone's on the same page. This also offers opportunities to think about examples as evidence needed for the self-assessment. So we just put this together. You can choose to use this with your staff or not as a way to get everybody on the same page using common language. And so use it if you choose, and you know, it's an option. So we adapted from the Vermont Family Engagement Toolkit, this family engagement self-assessment for today. Please take a moment right now to make a copy of the self-assessment for your own use. We're going to give you some time to complete a portion of it, but again, you'll need to make a copy so that you can interact with it. So we're asking you to do that now. And once you have your own copy, we're going to give you some time to actually explore it a little bit. And so, Marianne, if you want to move ahead, we'll put the activity up.
To it. We don't have access to it.
So Jim is fixing that, I think. Are you, Jim? We'll make sure that so you'll have a view only right to that document, and so you'll need to make a copy. So hopefully we'll get it so that you can open it, and then you'll see that it says view only and you can make a copy. Apologize for that.
And once you have your own copy, we're going to give you about 10 minutes to select one of the core principles to complete. You'll read each item in the section of your choice, reflect on the current status of your school or district, and select the rating that best fits, and actually record any evidence, artifacts, or data that you would use to support your rating. Determine the total score for that one section that you worked on. And if you have any time left, once we get started, we encourage you to jump to the section or principle 6 to review until we come back together again. So this particular slide has steps to complete the activity. Again, we want you to get into this document and just look at one section more in depth and actually conduct some of that self-assessment on your own. The idea then is that you would take this back to your district with your team to continue working on. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. We'll try to reach out and help you. Otherwise, I'm going to set 10 minutes on my timer and give you some time to explore the self-assessment. And time starts now. And coming back in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Welcome back. How was it? Did you find that you had evidence and artifacts to support your thinking? There's a variety of methods that can be used to evaluate family engagement and actually get the data that maybe you have, maybe you don't have. The Vermont Toolkit provides guidance for several data collection methods that can be used, and we've listed those here. They can be found in the toolkit on pages 99 through 104, and it goes through each of the data collection methods listed in this chart and provides best practice strategies as well as recommendations on how to implement the method. The likelihood that you'll need to, gather more data is pretty high, I would say. And so hopefully you can take some examples here to use that. In addition, if we go on to the next slide, surveys are really popular, pretty common, a way to collect data from a large number of stakeholders. And there's many types of surveys that schools can use, or you can create your own. The resources on this slide provide examples to help you plan a survey for your school. And we're going to give you a few more minutes to dig into these examples. There's question banks, toolkits, all sorts of resources for you to develop a survey and think about really what is the data you need to collect, what questions might you need to ask to get that. So we're going to pause again for 5 minutes and give you the opportunity to explore the resources listed here, as well as digging in on the previous one if you're interested. What method of gathering data to inform your family engagement practices fit best with your school? And again, I'm going to set the timer for 5 minutes and let you explore a little bit. All right. One of the hazards of taking a day-long training and putting it in a 90-minute section is timing, and certainly feeling rushed. And so we apologize. Would love to have you spend some more time on this, but we would like to give you a little bit of processing time at least and put you back into breakout rooms to think about how would you use the self-assessment or other tools in your school or district. What did you explore? What methods do you currently use to gauge family engagement? And to what degree will the methods of data collection you currently use be appropriate with diverse families? So some pretty heavy questions to consider. And certainly we want you to consider these and any others that you have. We're going to give you about 6 or 7 minutes or so to get into a quick breakout room and give you some time to discuss.
So welcome back, everyone, from your breakout rooms. We're going to kind have Jim just share a little bit about defining community engagement. Lisa, anything you wanted to say before we move on? Sorry.
No, I think that people are understanding that this is time consuming and that they're just dipping their toe in a little bit. And so we are going to make the shift away from family engagement and think a little bit broader into the community engagement aspect. So Jim, take it away.
Sure. So a lot of resources you find will be labeled family and community engagement. We really look at them, you wind up realizing they're mostly about family engagement. But there is this greater context that districts can look into as part of their overall improvement strategies, which is how do you engage the community? And so to get started with that, we're going to do another one of your Did You Knows. So as we look at the identity of who is the community and who are these stakeholders, it's a much broader group than just families. And sometimes those purposes of those stakeholders are much different than what families would have for in relationship to how they would be engaged in your school. And so we can think of community engagement from a broad variety of perspectives. There's certainly local political groups, towns, municipalities, counties, things like that. There's also another whole area that relate to different types of businesses or different institutions. And then there's always civic organizations and groups that are part of the broader term community engagement. And then finally, there seems to be a group that are sort of the alumni, the booster clubs, the charitable organizations, and then there are some very deliberate things that schools and districts can do with the formation of community groups that come in for the purposes of serving on some form of committee. Parent-teacher organizations or school improvement committees are all things that are there. What the challenge is for schools then is how do you measure your impact of community engagement? So what we want to do is give you a quick overview of a few things we've discovered and a little tool to help you do that. But one of the things we do recommend, as usual, is know your community. And so Wise-Public has a great place for you to go and learn about your community from above and beyond what might be just school data. We would also be looking at some of the community data. And another place that is a great place to learn about your community is the census. And so there's some links to those tools that are available on the screen or in Wise-Public. There will be a new census coming out. A lot of the census data now is based on 10 years ago and the various updates. New census is coming up, and within a year or so, you're going to see that data impacting things like federal funding formulas, other kinds of programming that's available in your community, social services, employment and training programs, all those kinds of things will be impacted by the census data. And of course, school districts will be too. And as a result, we should be taking a look at what's changed from 10 years ago to now in terms of our census data and what it tells us about our demographics, our economics, our health, and our education. Next slide. And there are all sorts of different purposes for conducting community engagement. Anything from solving a problem to raising funds for the basketball team. Sometimes it's decision-making that we engage the community in. Sometimes it's providing a service. Sometimes it's trying to get raise money. There's all sorts of different reasons why you want to engage your community in a way that supports your overall school vision and mission. There's a few of them listed on the slide. And next slide. There are a number of opportunities that you can that spark the engagement, anywhere from AODA prevention to after-school programming, dropout prevention, service learning. All these kinds of things reflect very often opportunities that spark engagement, whether it's the school looking to engage the community or it's the community saying we want to get involved with the school. And then next. And there are many, many, many different ways to engage stakeholders, anywhere from print materials to committees and community summits and steering committees. There's different kinds of programming that comes in your school. Junior achievement is one example. And then of course there's booster clubs. So all these different ways to engage stakeholders, the community in your school, with all the different purposes behind why different communities, entities within your community want to get engaged with your school, why you want to engage them, makes this a pretty difficult thing sometimes to do some inquiry into what's the effectiveness of our community engagement. So we want to give you a little bit of a tool that you can use to begin that process. And we want to begin that by talking about the different levels of public engagement. Now, this comes from a toolkit on community engagement from Australia, actually. And they created a sort of a spectrum of community engagement. And it helps frame your thinking about, if we're going to conduct some inquiry into the effectiveness of community engagement, let's first think about what is the type of participation we have? What's our goal within that? And then what does that mean in terms of effectiveness? And so they start with this level of impact and increasing to something called empowerment. And so there are times we engage the community purely for the sake of providing information or gathering information. There are times we engage the public to consult on something, but then there are times when maybe we provide a empowerment to the community. There's going to be a decision made. We're looking for the community to make that decision, and we move on from there to implement whatever that decision is. So as we think about inquiry into engagement, we want to think about the different types of engagement, the different groups we're engaging, but what's the level of that engagement? Next slide. And so how do you go about gathering evidence about that? There are so many different aspects to community engagement, in particular when we talk about it within the context of COVID-19, that it's going to be necessary to kind of zero in and narrow down your engagement conversation. And so here are some sample questions that could help you go from this broad topic of how do we determine the effectiveness of our family and community engagement, especially on the community engagement side, as we talk here today, to maybe a more narrower vision of why we would like to do some inquiry into our effectiveness. And that might have a lot to do with what your overall school strategic plan might have is leading you in your district. So, and there's several examples there. Narrow your question is our advice. And then what types of evidence of community engagement look like? Well, much of it's similar to what you might find in the family engagement. You know, there's always surveys, but we can survey folks to death, and that's not always healthy or a good idea. But then there are other things that might be something you would look into, whether it's observations or meeting notes, or sometimes we look at community engagement, talk about participation and attendance counts. You know, I've worked with schools where they've decided to implement a mentoring program, and one of the measures was how many mentors did we have, how often did they meet with our students, and as well as a survey about, well, what was the benefit of that in terms of impact. Next slide. So what we would like to recommend here is that there is no one survey, there is no one data gathering technique that will will meet all of your needs to conduct your inquiry into effectiveness. But we do feel it should begin with a mapping of your community engagement. There's all sorts of different levels of community engagement as we've talked about. So where do you begin? And so one thing we would recommend is that you begin with mapping out who is currently involved with your school. Who are those stakeholders? What's their level of engagement? Is it just an informational thing, or is this more of a group we're empowering to do some function within the school to serve some need? Who are those representatives? And then what's that desired impact? And talk about that. And then from the desired impact, how could you discuss and maybe talk about what's the actual impact? What evidence do we have about what that is doing? Now, some things with informing types of a level of engagement, maybe do we want to know, is our community informed of what we think they ought to be informed? That's simpler than the impact of that mentoring program and how did it serve the needs of a group of students in our school. So think about how you might do that engagements. And maybe there are things that are being done already through various groups or efforts by teachers, by principals, maybe the after school program, maybe you have a community education program in your district. The idea here would be to map that out and talk about, begin the conversation of like looking at all the different types of community engagement activities you have in your school. And again, we'd recommend that you kind of zero in. If you want to talk about a career and college readiness, that might mean we're going to do that mapping within the context of that type of a concept. If you're going to talk about it within literacy, how are we engaging a community and our goals around literacy, that might shape your mapping. So we've got a tool. It's marked up on top there, linked up on top. You just link to that. It will open that up and it'll give you an opportunity to take a look at that tool. I just a couple minutes here. And so link at it, take a look at it. And while we're talking, I just wanted to mention one other thing. There is also a way to create a stakeholder engagement log that we would recommend. And so this is a way to kind of gather the practical types of data about participation rates, etc. And that too is linked on that slide. So one of the things as we move on to the next slide is
Jim, do we want to give them a couple minutes to just make some notes in their notes section, open up the docs, make a copy for themselves?
sure, let's do
they
that.
wanna
I
use
agree.
it?
Let's
Yeah.
give them a few minutes.
I would also say, the engagement log would be something that you could use to kind of gather, collect day-to-day information, right? Calls, emails, meetings, that kind of thing. And that would be an important resource to actually use in order to map the engagement that you've got going on. So you've got a couple of different tools here for a couple of little bit of a different reason to have them. Encourage too you to put any feedback, any thoughts, any reactions in the chat. We'd love to hear what you think.
So one of the ways you could use this is if you know there's a grade level team, maybe a program coordinator, maybe the principal, you could assign this to the different folks that are engaged in your school somehow with a community engagement effort and ask them to complete this. So it doesn't become such a huge task for one person in your district. Maybe the counselor has some groups that they're working with. They could do some work on that, describe that for you, map that out for you. Maybe the principal has a community action team that they meet with regularly. They could describe that and map that out. Why don't we move on here, and because we're getting close to 11. And so once you've kind of gathered some of this data, you know, it's real important to sort of take the opportunity to analyze it and look at it. Is the community engagement mapping exercise giving you the information that you need to help sort of meet maybe some of your vision of what community engagement should be in your school, or that you would like it to be in your school? How well is it supporting your overall school improvement initiatives? Is it meeting those needs that you've articulated as to why we're engaged with a community partner or community group? The other aspect of this is to think about the different perspectives of these different stakeholders. And you know, each group has different ideas of what should be done. And are all of these multiple perspectives aligned to achieve that desired outcome? Or are they working at cross purposes? And sometimes there are cross purposes within a community, especially when you start talking about taxes. So there's some things here that you can begin to do with that mapping exercise to look at who's involved, how much are they involved, who's having more weight in their decision making and in the service delivery of what we're doing in our district, and which groups perhaps aren't. So if we go to the next slide. So when you analyze the maps and analyze maybe some of the data you have, we recommend you look at to what degree are the stakeholders that are engaged with your school representative of the demographics in your school. Are you noticing that maybe there's some groups that aren't involved? And for example, we did this in one district one time on some AODA prevention stuff. And we found out that we had a lot of folks coming in and engaged in our school that were serious about that topic. But we had forgotten some tribal representatives. And so that helped us figure out that we needed to broaden our view for community engagement. And, you know, is the goal being reached or not? Is it being effective or not? And then what might be some next steps based on what you see to continue to improve on your overall community engagement? And so those are some things we think once you can gather that information, once you can kind of get a sense of that map, when it's related to a specific or maybe broader overall purpose, think through using that data in a way that informs your next step planning.
Before you go on, Jim, I think I saw a hand raised. So I just paused. Does anyone have any questions or comments to share? All right, Jim, take us home.
All right, I guess so. Next slide, please. What are the next steps here? One next step is to figure out how you might use some of the resources from today to conduct an inquiry into family and community engagement. We do have a couple of extension activities available to you. One is you could do some of this work through a data inquiry process that we recommend, and there's a data inquiry planning guide that's linked here. As well as for some districts and schools that would like to do this in a very formalized fashion, there's something called the Data Inquiry Journal. There's both a video on how to use that and some slides on how to use the Data Inquiry Journal. This is embedded in the WiseDash for Districts tool, so you have to have access to that to use it. We also have a video on once you've kind of collected your data and come up with some hypothesis of your practices and talking about, you have an understanding and clarified your data. One thing we find very helpful in the process is you have to get to sort of a problem statement that will result from your data analysis. But then how would you use that to really discuss what's at the root cause of that problem statement? And so there's another tool we've developed here called the root cause analysis. There's both a video for that as well as some slides for that. We do have some open office hours if you want to come back and meet with us to talk about this particular presentation and maybe some work you might be doing with the family and community engagement inquiry process. Give us on February 18th from 1 to 3 o'clock. You're welcome to join. It's our open office hours, and that is linked there via Zoom to join. So we encourage you to complete some follow-up activities in taking a look at your family and community engagement efforts. We want to thank you for joining the webinar today. There is another one coming up on March the 3rd. If you would like to join that, click on the link. It'll bring you to the place to sign up for that. The topic of that particular will be school and instructional leadership inquiry. And that will wrap up the series for the data leadership webinars in this particular school year. We also want to remind you there's a brief feedback survey. Please click on that link, give us some feedback. It's important to us. That's how we gather the data that we use to do our own inquiry on the effectiveness of what we're providing to folks across the state. So thanks a lot and stay safe. Have a good weekend, folks. We will hang on for just a little bit if anyone wants to hang afterwards and ask a few questions.
And also you'll note in the very last slide, we did compile a list of all the resource links that were mentioned. We put them together in a doc that's linked here. They're presented in the order in which they appear in the presentation. So if you want kind of a one-stop shop for the resource links, it's there for your convenience. Thanks, everybody.